To open the section focused on generic entry, it's worth asking the question, why do generic drugs matter? The answer is because generic drugs reduce the cost of medicine. In the United States, 90% of the prescriptions dispensed are generics. However, only 25% of drug spending is generics. The next question is, why do generics cost so much less? While there are many reasons, 3 highlights are that generic drugs have a greatly reduced research and development burden relative to innovative drugs. Generic entrants can study the commercial success of branded drugs, so they have no failed launches. They can anticipate the sales volume, they can avoid investments in drugs which will flop, and essentially, they don't have to have failed launches. Also, because the branded drug has been on the market, and people and prescribers are aware that the drug exists and can treat a disease, there's a reduced marketing and advertising burden on generic entrants. Another important consideration is what are the factors influencing generic entry decisions? How do generic companies decide which drugs to go after? Anecdotally, it tends to come down to a small set of factors, such as having a production line sitting idle with capacity to make a certain kind of drug. But this table summarizes a study which took a deeper look and found that the ingredient had a large effect on generic decision making, the reason being that generics were able to leverage relationships with trusted suppliers and they already knew the compound properties of that ingredient. The recipe and testing can also have an effect, because having familiarity with the form or other characteristics of an ingredient can reduce the cost of developing that drug. The capital required to launch can also have a large effect. Having experience with a certain drug form or having a line already set up to make a certain kind of drug can reduce the development cost. And finally, the distribution can have an effect, because it can reduce the effort to find customers. So many generic companies will specialize on things such as certain dosage forms, or certain therapeutic categories, or even certain sales channels. An interesting observation is that there's a strong generic first mover advantage. The first generic to launch can enjoy an 80% market share advantage over the second entrant, and this advantage can last for many years. Some of the possible reasons for this first mover advantage is that supplier decisions tend to be based not only on price, but also on the reputation and the recall history of the generic manufacturer. So once they select a manufacturer who they know and trust, price is not the only factor which is going to influence them shifting. Also, switching can introduce inventorying costs because the supplier will have to carry drugs from 2 separate generic manufacturers at the same time. So, in summary, the cost of switching suppliers may favor sticking with the first entrant even when they're no longer the cheapest option on the market. So to be a first entrant, generic companies generally have to focus on paragraph 4 challenges. And as I mentioned earlier, for new chemical entities, the earliest that a generic can challenge a patent is 1 year before the expiration of the new chemical entity exclusivity date, or the NCE-1 date. For companies without the resources or without the inclination to be the first to file a paragraph 4 challenge, some companies wait to be the second entrant and wait until after the first round of paragraph 4 challenges. If the key patents survive the first round of challenges, then it may be preferable to examine those challenges and see if there's any remaining weaknesses which can be exploited at a much lower cost, having learned from the failed challenges of others. A backup plan here is that if the first round filers succeed in invalidating the key patents, then the second entrants can simply shift to a day 181 entry strategy and enter the day after the 180-day generic exclusivity expires for the first generic challenger. Alternatively, these second entrants may also partner with a branded company and sell authorized generics. Yet another strategy is to be a late follower and to find low competition opportunities, such as off-patent drugs with no sources, or discontinued drugs, which might simply have been abandoned because the market size was too small, or perhaps they are too hard to manufacture, or off-patent drugs with only one source, perhaps a generic, perhaps a branded source, but still an opportunity for a second company to enter the market and provide some price competition. Even if these aren't long-term opportunities, they still might be useful as short-term opportunities to occupy production lines and marketing teams while waiting for a larger opportunity to emerge. Yet another type of generic entry is a branded generic. Moving from right to left, I've already described traditional generics, which are sold only after drug patents expire, authorized generics, which are essentially third-party sales of drugs coming off the same production line as the branded drug, and branded generics are simply generic drugs sold under a brand name. For example, Doofa bears, these gummy bears sold by Abbott in the Ukraine and other markets. In this case, Abbott is able to use the fact that they're a trusted brand to sell what would otherwise be a low-cost product in markets where people may not have much faith in local generic manufacturers. Ask me anything. Here's my email address, yali@drugpatentwatch.com. I look forward to your questions and comments.